Communities in Queensland and New South Wales are experiencing heavy rainfalls, with more than 1 month's worth of rain expected to fall or have fallen over the past couple of days. Severe coastal erosion often accompanies heavy rains and storms, and Australians have already lost metres from well-loved beaches, threatening homes as well as tourism.
Well, one academic is suggesting a radical solution to protect the coast around Sydney, the Sydney Great Barrier Reef. Roggema is Professor of Sustainable Urban Environments at the University of Technology, Sydney, and he joins us now in the studio. Good morning to you, Rob. Thanks for joining us today. Can you explain your big idea of a Sydney Great Barrier Reef?
Yes, the idea comes from climate change, basically. There's two effects of climate change. One is that the oceans is heating up, and that means that the Great Barrier Reef is bleaching and will die eventually. The second effect of climate change is that we will face cyclones in the southern Pacific, which might eventually hit Sydney. Those two elements brought me to the idea of creating a barrier reef in front of the coast of Sydney, because it does two things. It creates the new ecological environment, which we will lose in the northern Pacific, and it protects the city from future storms and cyclones.
Let's just look at, first, before we look at the reef itself. So you're suggesting, based on evidence, that the barrier reef in Queensland will eventually die, and that that cyclones will become more prominent further south and will hit Sydney.
Yeah, that's right. So I hope that the Great Barrier Reef will survive, and I hope that we will counterattack climate change. But even if we stop global warming at the moment, today, we will have the effects of global warming in the next 20, 30, 40 years. So the temperature in the oceans will keep on rising. And that means that there is an effect on the Great Barrier Reef. And what we saw the last couple of years, that there is tens of percents of the Great Barrier Reef already bleaching and dying off, basically.
So we have, there have been predictions by the CSIRO. You're suggesting that we are going to be seeing more extreme weather further south in this country. Without the barrier, without any sort of protection shelf system at the moment, we have seen homes lost, beaches swept away, not just along the Sydney coast, but up in the Gold Coast as well. You've seen many homes lost to the sand erosion there. What sort of environment, weather-wise, do you see? How destructive will it be without some sort of structure protecting us?
Well, it could be compared to what Sandy did to New York, basically. So no one expected a cyclone to hit New York a couple of years ago. And what we saw there is that big parts of Manhattan actually were threatened by this cyclone and had severe damage. That could happen eventually to cities like Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong as well.
So it's not the threat posed by the wind, it's more the storm surge, the rising tides and the like.
Exactly, yeah.
How does a reef stop that?
Well, a reef is kind of a barrier. Like if you have barrier islands in front of the coast, or a barrier reef, it will protect the storm surge from getting into the coast itself. It distracts the energy out of the waves a little bit, and that's why there's not a big storm surge at the coast.
Yeah, I mean, you
itself.
still do get surges inside the Great Barrier Reef, but you're saying it would lessen that.
Yes, that's right. It will top off the most severe surges.
So how do you make a fake barrier reef, if you like, and where would it go to and from?
Yeah, I think it would be not a fake barrier reef. It will eventually be a natural reef, but based on that we can, as humans, can create the conditions to grow a natural reef.
And how do you do that?
So it could be, for instance, that we use the platforms, old platforms from oil and gas companies, and put them down on the bottom of the sea, and create the conditions to plant new little bits of coral there, which will grow eventually to a normal and a natural reef.
And where would you see this going to and from as far as Newcastle down to Wollongong?
Yeah, in my imagination, eventually...
A big imagination?
It is a big imagination,
and
absolutely.
Dare I say costly imagination too, because it would be extremely costly, would it not?
Well, it doesn't have to be, because the oil and gas companies need to get rid of some of their platforms.
They've got to sink them somewhere.
So they have to sink them somewhere, and why don't they put them there where we can actually design them in a way that there is a new reef emerging.
Has this idea worked elsewhere in the world?
There are a couple of examples and successful examples around the world. For instance, in the United States, they put actually trains and old ships in front of the coast, and natural coral is growing on those places. Not every single example is successful, but therefore I think it's very important to start designing and researching what are the exact conditions to create a reef like this.
Have you had much response to your proposal?
Yes, there's quite some response, and some people are very enthusiastic about it, and some people really don't like the idea.
Yeah.
And how would you see, you're saying it wouldn't cost a lot of money, however, other people might beg to differ on that. Who would fund it? Would you see this as a government-private thing?
I think so, and remember that if we don't do anything, it might be much more costly if we need to get rid of the damage that a cyclone would bring to the city.
What are your predictions, just finally before you go, on a cyclone hitting Sydney?
Well, prediction is always difficult. I think if you look at the daily scores of the AFL or the NRL, then predictions are very difficult. But I think in 10, 20, maybe 30 years from now, we will have the possibility of a cyclone hitting Sydney.
Professor Rob Roggema, thanks very much for coming in.